Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. Chicago taxpayers are handed a massive overtime bill from the police department. Our Spotlight Politics team on that and more.
The entire system is not working.
And it needs someone who can do big things. So they need someone who's multidimensional.
Meet the two Democratic candidates in the contentious race to replace outgoing Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx. And has the pendulum swung too far? Are chronic pain sufferers the latest victims of the opioid crisis, unable to get the medicine they need? And now to some of today's top stories. A lockdown is being lifted at the Illinois Capitol building. Secretary of State Alexi Giannoulias says police received notice of a threat involving the Illinois Capitol building. Police issued the lockdown order around 2 o'clock this afternoon to conduct a sweep of the building. Chicago public health officials are reporting 3 new cases of the measles today, bringing the total in the last week to 8 cases. Officials say the new cases were all reported at the migrant shelter in Pilsen. The Chicago Department of Public Health says a team from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention arrived today to help support efforts to curb the spread of the highly infectious virus. CDPH is encouraging Chicagoans to review their immunization records and make sure they are up to date on the measles vaccine. Chicago City employees earned nearly $500 million in overtime last year, and that's up 19% over 2022. And the bulk of that, nearly $300 million, went to Chicago police employees. A WTTW News analysis shows CPD's overtime spending last year was 40% more than in 2022 and 3 times higher than the $100 million earmarked for police overtime. The only 2 departments to spend less on OT were the Chicago Fire Department and the Department of Public Health. Our Spotlight Politics team will have more on this in a few minutes. And the CTA also relied on overtime to keep buses and trains running last year. But despite a Freedom of Information Act request nearly 2 months ago, the agency still hasn't provided detailed data on operator hours. It's part of a pattern of chronic failure to comply with FOIA requests in a timely manner, though a spokesperson says the CTA works to fill requests as quickly as possible. Budget data provided to WTTW News shows overtime for rail and bus operations came in under budget last year, but the agency still spent nearly $2 million more just on overtime than it did pre-pandemic. And we've got much more, including an update on recruitment efforts at CTA on our website. And if you drive to or from work on the Kennedy, you might have noticed the honeymoon is over. Construction season is back. Work on the second phase of the Kennedy Expressway construction began with closures last night. This year's work, focused on the express lanes, started earlier than expected because of warmer temperatures. The express lanes are expected to stay closed until construction wraps in the fall. Some young voters are casting their ballots early in life.
They did research, they engaged in civic dialogue in the classroom, and this is just bringing that work outside of the classroom again to the polling place. We believe that if young people vote early, they will be lifelong engaged citizens and voters.
MCVA Challenge led several hundred students to the Loop's early voting super site this morning to vote in this year's primary election. The initiative, Parade to the Polls, is intended to provide students with disabilities the opportunity to register and vote. 17-year-olds can vote in the Illinois primary if they will be 18 by the general election. And you can be sure to check out our online voter guide for more information on how to vote and what offices you'll see on your ballot. That's at WTTW.com/voter guide. Up next, we meet the 2 Democrats running for Cook County State's Attorney right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
It's one of the most hotly contested races in next week's primary. 2 Democrats are battling it out to become Cook County's top prosecutor to take over for the outgoing state's attorney, Kim Foxx. The attack ads are flying, the money is flowing in, and the candidates are attempting to paint a stark difference between each other. Here's Paris Schutz with the story.
It's the second largest prosecutor's office in the country and home to more than 3,000 employees. Outgoing Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx's tenure has been marked by a softer approach to low-level crime and her controversial handling of the Jussie Smollett case. But the two Democratic candidates to replace her have taken a hard tack against each other. Eileen O'Neill Burke, a former prosecutor, defense attorney, and trial and appellate court judge, has outraised her opponent Clayton Harris by more than double, with some big dollars coming from Republican donors. Harris, a former aide to former Governor Rod Blagojevich, head of the Illinois International Port District, and lobbyist, is a choice of the Cook County Democratic Party and Chair Tony Preckwinkle, who has campaigned on his behalf. He's received big dollar donations from prominent Democratic donors, including the Chicago Teachers Union. He says the money trail paints a large contrast.
It's very extreme right funds, and that's what's troubling and should trouble everyone, because this portends, it highlights an extremism of my opponent.
But O'Neill Burke says Harris worked against unions as a government lobbyist for Lyft and lacks the experience necessary to do the job.
And every day I'm hearing the same thing, that people are afraid. And they're afraid to come downtown. They're afraid to ride the CTA. They're afraid to go out at night. Those are the people that are supporting me.
Both O'Neill Burke and Harris say they support the no cash bail provision of the state's newly enacted SAFETY Act, which only seeks pretrial detention for the most violent offenders.
If you're not a danger to the public, you don't need to be detained pre-trial. When will we ask for detention under my state's attorney's office? Anytime somebody is threatening somebody with a gun, anytime somebody is committing a violent crime on the CTA, and anytime somebody is caught with an assault weapon.
Any crime, committed with a gun, we're aggressively prosecuting and making sure that people understand that there's a certainty in the prosecution that comes with any crime that's committed.
The two differ, however, on their approach to some of the so-called lower-level crimes like retail theft. Harris says he'd continue Kim Foxx's policy of only charging felonies to offenders who steal more than $1,000 in goods or have a long rap sheet of shoplifting.
Again, for me and my administration, $1,000 is the threshold for a felony, but below that, we're still holding everyone accountable, and we can do that with misdemeanor.
O'Neill Burke says she'd stick to state law, charging felonies to offenders who steal more than $300 in goods.
You can clear out several aisles of a mom-and-pop grocery store or several aisles of a Walgreens before you get to $1,000. The ramifications of this policy are that Walgreens, CVS, Walmart, Target, mom-and-pop grocery stores are closing. They're closing all over the city because of theft, sometimes in neighborhoods where they're needed the most.
A recent attack ad from Harris highlights reporting that shows O'Neill Burke worked as a prosecutor in 1993 to convict a young black boy for murder. In 2002, a federal judge ruled that the arrest was illegal and the confession was coerced by the questioning officer, and that the case should have been thrown out.
She should have looked at the evidence in front of her and realized that that didn't warrant moving forward on a prosecution, at least not at that point in time. At best, it's bad judgment. And the fact that even today that she doubles down on it, there's no acknowledgement of that, is the part that's also scary.
I prosecuted a juvenile 30 years ago who confessed to the brutal murder of his elderly next-door neighbor. His attorney made the decision to put him on the stand where he repeated the confession. Neither the juvenile, his mother, or his attorney ever alleged that there was any coercion in that confession.
Also running for Cook County State's Attorney are former Chicago Alderman Bob Fioretti as a Republican and Andrew Charles Kopinski as a Libertarian candidate.
And Paris, you know, a recent poll has this race neck and neck. How would you size it up?
Well, as I answer all these questions, it just depends on turnout. What do we know? It's going to probably be a low turnout election. That tends to favor the person that has the apparatus behind them that can get out the vote. In this case, Mr. Harris has the Democratic Party, Tony Preckwinkle, the Chicago Teachers Union. That's a lot of folks that have boots on the ground, that can knock on doors, that can drive people to the polls and stuff like that. So he would tend to be favored in that regard, although if turnout favors folks that want a more quote-unquote law and order type of candidate in the prosecutor's office, then that would favor Eileen O'Neill Burke. So again, it really comes down to who turns out, but we do know it's going to be low turnout.
And she's also raised quite a bit of money in that race.
And she's raised more than 2 times that he has, although Paul Vallis raised more than Brandon Johnson Again, it came down to turnout.
Not always a predictor. All right, Paris Schutz, thank you. We're going to bring in your teammates in just a bit because Chicago taxpayers are handed a massive overtime bill from city employees while the Chicago Bears pledge billions for a lakefront stadium. And with 1 week until the primary, races are heating up. The teammates I mentioned are the ones you know and love. Our Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris is still here because we cannot get rid of him. So, Heather, you and our colleague Jared Rutecki did a deep dive into the city's 2023 OT numbers, overtime numbers, and it turns out taxpayers are picking up a pretty hefty bill. Fill us in.
Well, it is a sign that the city is still reeling from sort of the pandemic staffing crunch. There were a lot of resignations. It's been harder to fill. That's meant that departments across the board have had to rely on overtime to get the work of the city done. However, the biggest expense, of course, is the police department, which spent nearly $300 million in overtime. And I think if you sort of take out the police department, the other departments are sort of in line what it's been for the last 5 years. But it's clear that the police department, despite repeated claims that they're going to get this under control, rely on overtime in a way that raises significant questions about whether Chicago's officers are deployed and managed appropriately.
You know, Chicago Police Superintendent Larry Snelling, he vowed to rein in overtime for officers. Is there any evidence that he's been able to make good on those efforts?
No, and the police department did not answer my detailed questions about their use of overtime, but it is clear that overtime surged in the second half of 2023. So in the first half of the year, overtime accounted for about $126 million, and it jumped nearly 30% in the second half of the year, which is, I think, an indication that they rely on overtime to make it through the hot summer months, which of course can be very violent, as well as sort of the summer festival season. A lot of those events that we know and love do not reimburse the police department for additional officers and security, and that is an additional burden for the department. However, I would imagine that city officials looking at this is a way to get millions of dollars to do all sorts of other things. They will be looking at this very closely because this money is spent with almost no oversight by the Chicago Police Department, or the Chicago City Council, I should say.
And briefly, Heather, 350 city employees earned more than $100,000 in overtime alone. That's on top of their salaries. Did the mayor's office have anything to say about that?
They didn't. The mayor's office also did not answer my detailed questions about Mayor Brandon Johnson's use of overtime. And I think it's clear that, again, this is being driven by the police department. So almost 238 police officers made that much just in overtime on top of their ample salaries, which is an indication that this is not a citywide overtime problem. This is a police overtime problem.
Amanda, let's pivot to the primary election. Just a week away, as we've been discussing, and the race to replace State Supreme Court Justice Ann Burke heating up. What's the latest there?
Well, so she stepped down early from this term. So the person who filled her spot, Joy Cunningham, is running for election. This is a big deal because essentially there's no Republican in the race. Whoever wins the primary is likely to get that job, and they get it for a long time, for 10 years at the minimum. And then it's pretty easy to actually keep that post once you've got it. So Cunningham is up against a judge named Jesse Reyes, and this has been a big deal as well because there has been no Latino ever on the Illinois Supreme Court, and Latinos feel really disenfranchised. They say that this is unfair, that Reyes or another Latino judge should have received the appointment when Burke stepped down in the first place. So that's part of it. And then, by the way, Ann Burke, married to none other than former Alderman Ed Burke. And of course, as we know, he was responsible for helping get a lot of judges to their posts in Cook County. So you have that. And then you have, he is a lawyer. There is a body that approves disciplinary actions when lawyers get in trouble, like, oh wait, Burke did, but he was convicted of corruption. And so, but he is allowed now, this is reporting from WBEZ, to keep his law license because there are enough members apparently on the Illinois Supreme Court that said that they had a conflict of interest in declaring whether he should lose his law license. And so he gets to keep it, and Reyes is making a big deal about this. We don't know whether Cunningham was one of them, presumably so, but that is the big issue in the race right now.
Okay, so there's another controversy that's brewing around the Bring Chicago Home referendum, which is still making its way through the courts. But this one involves the Chicago Teachers Union encouraging their members to bring their students to a Friday morning rally at CTU headquarters. Paris, some are claiming that there is a conflict of interest here because the CTU is so closely aligned with Mayor Brandon Johnson and his Bring Chicago Home referendum. And briefly before I come to UP, Chicago Public Schools issued this statement, quote, Chicago Public Schools encourages student civic engagement with the electoral process. We do not endorse specific campaigns or advocate for specific election results. CPS has shared with the CTU our concerns that the March 15th event will be nonpartisan. CTU has assured CPS that Bring Chicago Home is not a partner or sponsor of this event and is not on the agenda.
Well, this is a situation that arises because of the complicated nature of CTU. They're the most powerful political organization in the city of Chicago, but also they represent teachers that teach students. According to CPS ethics code, you're not allowed to politic on school time. This is school time. They're inviting kids to the union headquarters for a rally. Now, they say it's going to be nonpartisan. They say they invited folks from both parties and all sides. But when CTU itself is a very ideologically driven organization that gives money to candidates and causes like Bring Chicago Home, it's hard to imagine that this is just an innocent sort of get out the vote rally for students. It's amazing to me that CTU was able to sort of arrange this before they even went to CPS. CPS found out about it because a conservative organization filed an ethics complaint, and CPS says, yeah, we have concerns about this. I mean, politics should be out of the classroom, but if you're going to bring it into the classroom, you got to present all sides.
Heather?
Well, I think Paris is right. When you have the most powerful political organization also being the representatives for the teachers in the schools, it's an issue. Now, I think that there is sort of competing values here, right? You want to get kids involved. You want to get kids sort of involved in the electoral process. Is the Union Hall the right place to do it? I think that's a question that, I think reasonable people can disagree on. But the fact of the matter is that, Chicago Public Schools and I think the CTU feel an obligation to sort of energize students. It's sort of
you get into trouble though when you bring in, and there was some invitation that said Bring Chicago Home
was going to be
proponents
an organizer
were
of this
going
event.
to be part of
Apparently
this event.
that got scrubbed after
and
CPS
CTU
concerns.
was very loud about this last year during the mayoral election when Mayor Lori Lightfoot, when her campaign invited students to begin volunteering and get involved in the civic engagement process. Real quick before we have to go, the Bears seem to be keeping Chicago as their home.
Yeah.
We're hearing reports that the team's prepared to spend $2 billion to build a new domed lakefront stadium. Paris?
Yeah, really.
Fire away.
They don't have drawings or renderings yet, but really, Friends of the Parks, obviously, they came out with a statement today. And it's interesting, they didn't say, unless I missed it, they didn't say in the statement they for sure are going to sue. They just said, we wish the Bears would work with us. There's other sites like the Michael Reese Hospital site that aren't, part of the Lakefront Protection Ordinance. So
it was a more tempered response than one
it
would have
was,
expected.
and it leads you to believe that the Bears might want to play ball with them, A, and B, the Bears, well, I didn't even, that was unintentional. Also,
see what you did there.
They put out a poll saying that Chicagoans like this kind of idea of having them stay on the lakefront like this. Maybe Friends of the Parks realizes, because they said in their statement, like, we hate to be the no organization all the time.
They want more people to be involved in this conversation,
right.
is also what they said. Okay, that's Spotlight Politics. Thank you, team. Amanda, Heather, Paris. And as we mentioned multiple times, Election Day is a week away, people, so be sure to check out our online voter guide. We've got details on how to vote early, where to vote, and information on the candidates running for office. It is all at WTTW.com/voter-guide. Up next, chronic pain sufferers struggling to get the prescribed medications they need. Stay with us. Most of us know someone who suffers from pain. In the U.S., an estimated 51 million people live with chronic pain. Today, their suffering is compounded by restrictions on the medication many need, opioids. Carol Marine and students from DePaul University's Center for Journalism Integrity and Excellence investigate, and Carol joins us now. Welcome back, Carol.
Thank you, Brandis. We know about the opioid crisis that's killed 640,000 people nationwide since 1999, according to the National Institutes of Health. But tonight, there's another crisis, a result of the former crisis. Many chronic pain sufferers are struggling to get the prescribed medications they need, and you're about to meet two of them. We begin with a Norwood Park woman who says she has to go from pharmacy to fill her prescription.
You are the one walking in and hoping and praying that this pharmacist will have sympathy, empathy, and help you fill this prescription.
Melzinia Conley is 66 years old. She says she started experiencing chronic pain in 2006. Can't live without these.
No.
To try and ease the hurt, she takes 6 pills a day, prescribed opioids called Percocet.
It allows you to manage, but at least you are able to keep your house clean, go to the grocery store. Yeah, you're gonna hurt, but it keeps you sane.
As her day wears on, the pain, she says, increases.
By 2 o'clock this afternoon, I feel like I'm dragging my left side of my body. By that night, I'm in sheer pain. The only thing I can do is lay down and complain.
Conley is diagnosed with complex regional pain syndrome, or CRPS. The pain is so bad, it is commonly known as the suicide disease.
I can be honest. There's been so many times I wanted to give up.
Some 50 miles southwest of Chicago in Sandwich, Illinois, Christy Ernst, like Melzinia Conley, struggles with pain.
I think people look at you and say, you look fine. You know what? You look fine. I don't understand. But it's pervasive and it's there all the time. So this is what I take on a daily basis. I throw it in my purse.
She has had 15 major surgeries and been in chronic pain for over a decade. Like Conley, she is prescribed Percocet. And like Conley, it's increasingly hard, she says, to fill her prescription from her local pharmacist.
They're telling me that it's a supply issue, that they're just not able to access that the supply has been cut way back.
So she makes the round trip from Sandwich all the way to Naperville to fill her prescription at Edward Hospital. What's happening to Ernst and Conley is happening to many others. The opioid crisis has now created a secondary crisis. In the early 2000s, opioids were heavily marketed and in some cases overprescribed. What followed was a rise in opioid overdose deaths. Federal regulators moved in to constrict both the manufacture and the prescribing of those drugs. The question now, whether that became an overcorrection that went too far. It's become a crisis, says Chris Herndon.
We are currently in a number of what I would consider to be crisis status of shortages of individual drugs, where our patients just can't get them because the pharmacies can't get them.
He's a professor of pharmacy practice at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville.
There's a pendulum that swings around this particular class of medications where we have loosening and tightening of the belt in terms of access.
In north suburban Bartlett at the local pharmacy there, Dr. Naren Kashoba sees the shortage play out on a daily basis.
We are monitored by the DEA, physicians, prescribers, and pharmacists. So we have to be careful how much we're dispensing. They have to be careful how much they're prescribing. So we're all trying to follow the rules.
Caught in the middle are those in pain seeking medication. The whiteboard at the Bartlett Pharmacy shows drug after drug on back order.
I would say that the DEA plays a large part in the constriction. They set production quotas, so how much opioid we're allowed to actually manufacture in the United States every year, and those quotas have been going down annually.
And going up is the frustration of chronic pain sufferers like Malzinia Conley and Christy Ernst.
So there's some days when well, not some days, every day I would love to go and participate, but there's just some days when I'll get my coat on and I'll be in tears. I can't do it.
I have people always tell me, how do you take that? Do you fear about getting addicted? It's so many different things. They don't understand how I get up in the morning, put these clothes on and shower, and how I feel.
Despite repeated requests, we were not able to have a conversation with the DEA concerning the questions about whether there has been a constriction on the manufacture and distribution of opioids, or in the words of Chris Herndon, the pendulum of production. Brandis.
And Carol, it can be kind of hard to understand and describe pain. What do the people who monitor pain management tell you?
They call it the fifth vital sign now. But the problem is I can measure your respiration, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, cannot measure your pain. You have to tell me, and I have to believe you.
Okay. Carol Maureen, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Join us tomorrow at 5:30 and 10 for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its 18 attorneys selected for the 2024 Super Lawyers List.